responded. We're now going to move into our final session of today. This session is going to focus on how we can manage and leverage our ERGs, even during a time when, as we know, remote work is the norm. Please welcome Tamara Pearce, Manager of Diversity and Inclusion and University Relations at Cree, Kerry Shad, Partner, Diversity and Inclusion Committee Co-Chair at Smith Anderson, Angela Clark, Diversity and Inclusion Leader at Fidelity Investments, and moderating for us today is the wonderful Courtney White, Head of Human Resources at BASF Agricultural Solutions North America. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and we really look forward to your insights.
Thank you so much. I tell you, today is already proven to be, highly enlightening and insightful. It is my hope right now that I am not making a faux pas and that I'm not on mute and that people can hear me as I speak as well, because that would be terrible.
You're good.
Thank you. With that, allow me to say good morning. And I'm pleased to join my esteemed colleagues on this panel. And I'm also pleased to join those viewing today for this important conversation on the role of employee resource groups in the time of COVID-19 and so many other challenging scenarios. Daily, I pause and reflect on the state of today, wondering also what will tomorrow bring following the time of COVID, the time of COVID-19. A phrase that has become synonymous with unanticipated disruption, disconnection, distraction, disappointment, fear, and physical distancing. A phrase that has also become synonymous with over 30% of small businesses closing with little to no prospect of reopening. A phrase that has become synonymous with more than 26.5 million employees in the U.S. who have filed for unemployment. A phrase that has become synonymous with significant change to our personal and professional lifestyles. And while COVID-19 has represented challenges for us individually and collectively, a question still remains: what learning will we take from it? And one of the insights I hope we will carry forward is the fact that we are all stronger together, knowing that one person can be a force, but together, a group of people can be a movement. Malcolm X once said, when I is replaced with we, even illness becomes wellness. And with such a pivotal role, employee resource groups represent connection and opportunity. Connection within the organization and also to the communities where we live and operate. They provide us with an opportunity to understand where we are and the journey we may need to take to get where we want to go. And although these times may feel dark in many ways, our employee resource groups serve as a light. And because of that, our organizations must serve as a lighthouse. And as I once heard a very wise person say, you can't be a beacon of light if you are scared of the dark. And so today, I am happy to kick off this conversation with colleagues who are definitively a light, working for organizations that are also definitively a lighthouse. And with that, I'd like to turn to our first question of the morning. And I'd like to ask my colleague, Angela Clark. Angela, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic may be one of the most disruptive external global events that many of us have ever experienced to date. How do we continue to drive diversity and inclusion despite increased responsibilities for our organizations?
Hi, Courtney, and thank you so much for the question. You hear me?
Yes.
Great. And I'm sorry that you can't see me. I can certainly see all of you, but I'm having some camera issues today, but I am still here. My phone, Courtney, is not on mute. And so thank you for the question. I would say a couple of things. One is, with all the racial tension now going on in this country, in the events in the last couple of weeks, I think in just terms of disruptions, the racial tension in this environment are definitely a close second, right? And so, but what I would say is that driving diversity and inclusion cannot, should not be the responsibility of the HR teams. And I'll even say so far as to say diversity and inclusion team. D&I change really can only ever be affected when the people who make the decisions in the day-to-day running of the business are driving it at every single level in their organization. And so I'm happy to say that at Fidelity, our diversity and inclusion, our strategies are at least somewhat recession-proof. And so by embedding diversity and inclusion into our business operation practices, there isn't really a forced priority trade-off during times like this, in terms of what that we're experiencing right now that can be potentially unexpected, right? And so D&I isn't necessarily on the chopping block phase because it's layered into the day-to-day operations and how we do business every single day versus a standalone program. And so, Courtney, an example that I would share with you and the team is, at Fidelity, we're really fortunate over the last couple of months, we've made the decision to do massive hiring. And so over the next several months, we are hiring thousands of new employees to the organization. And neither the diversity and inclusion team nor the HR team need to really push for diversity and inclusion to be considered in their hiring plan. And it's really because this is just the way we do business every single day. And so I'm really pleased to see that we're tapping the broad range of talent in this latest push.
Angela, thank you so much for that insight. I think you've said quite a bit around how really making sure that diversity and inclusion is not a reaction. It is a part of the core strategy, the values of the organization, such that continuing it is not a challenge, it's an expectation. That is absolutely wonderful. I'd also invite Tamara or Kerry, do you have any response or insight that you'd also like to add to that?
Yeah, of course, it would echo what Angela said in regards to, diversity and inclusion has to be a part of the DNA in order to truly be at that recession-proof stage. The other piece I would add is that you never arrive, right? You're always continuing to work. So even if in COVID-19 and even in some of this social injustice unrest that we're experiencing today, that the work of DE&I professionals and practitioners just continue to evolve as the world around us evolve. And that's where, the mindset that we should always take to continuing to push this strategy forward.
Kerry, anything to add on from your part?
Kerry, you're muted.
And it's probably my fault, Kerry, because I said words I should have never said in the beginning.
How about now?
We can hear you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Sorry about that. I would just echo what Angela and Tamara said. It is critically important in our view that it not be an afterthought and it not be an appendage to the organization. We have and we're a law firm. We're very different from the organizations of the other presenters here, but we have as a specific platform in our strategic planning strategy for the firm as a whole, diversity and inclusion initiatives. So it is part of our overall strategic planning for the firm. We have diversity and inclusion committee representation on our firm management committee. And I think that's the way that it has to be. And until it is that way, you're not going to have sustained progress.
So, regardless, interestingly enough, regardless of the difference in industry or the focus, that many of us may have, there still is consistency in theme, and it's still going back to this idea. It sounds like that diversity, equity, inclusion, this fairness of treatment for employees should be ingrained as a core value of what the organization does, such that when we get to the times of uncertainty, when things are unpredictable, that we're still leaning in to what we know we may need to do. And that perhaps leads me to another question. And maybe, Angela, if you don't mind, I'll start with you once more. And this is around, although we have it built into our DNA, if you will, that employee resource groups are pivotal and critical. Clearly, what's happening in the world right now has, created some potential new ways of working for many. Some certainly may have had remote teams, may have had, virtual ways of working, but it's been heightened quite a bit. Even those who are still reporting to a site every day may have had new ways of working, whether that's through safety protocols or things that they need to do, upon arrival to work or even returning home. And so with these ideas of new ways of working, talk to us, have you had to do anything different when it comes to trying to maintain employee engagement and active communication?
I think that's a really good question, Courtney, and thank you. So what I would say is this: building networks has shifted to an online digital experience long before COVID ever became a thing, right? And so we believe there's really no secret to how to keep folks connected, because we've been doing this for decades. And so things that come to mind, I think about the cell phones that most of us have. I think about Facebook and Instagram, and the list goes on and on. But what we are thinking hard about is what to do to maximize both the engagement and equality when folks do start returning back to work. And so it's highly likely, and we've talked about this in the past, right, that not everyone can or will want to come back to work altogether. And being really thoughtful about equalizing visibility, executive contact, work assignments. When some folks are back in the office 100%, while others are still working from home. And not only that, but they have their hands full because they're thinking about daycare, they're thinking about taking care of small children. In all honesty, just finding it easier for their lifestyle to work from home and even ignore the traffic. I live in the city of Boston, so that is a factor and a consideration. This is where it feels like it really gets complicated and where we all need to be extremely thoughtful, intentional, and specific and prescriptive. And so a couple of things that we've done, some of which we've even done before COVID, I'll mention. And so one thing I think is key and extremely important, and I talk about this often, is investing in digital solutions. And so this is going to be the way of the future anyway. And so a couple of things we've recently done is, in Q1 of this year, actually in January of this year, we launched a 100% virtual program called Together We Ride. And we partnered with our Women's Employee Resource Group, as well as an outside vendor known as the Nook Online, to create a 100% virtual resource that supports both the personal and the professional well-being of women at Fidelity. The second example I'll share that we've recently done in Q2 is we launched another 100% digital tandem learning methodology for associates and their managers, known as Aspire to Lead. And so this is also a development program that leverages partnerships with our Black and Hispanic Employee Resource Group. They were a key component and factor of this. So much to say that if you are not part of an employee resource group at Fidelity, we typically don't tap you on the shoulder to be part of these development programs. And so we also work with an external vendor called LeadVantage. And this program really focuses on enhancing leadership skills through vigorous practice and repetition. So those are two, just the digital piece. The second thing I would mention is continuing to leverage employee resource groups to drive community and stronger engagement. Our ERGs are leading our total employee engagement strategy. They have a seat at the table. They're talking to Abby, our CEO. We have heads of HR and other business units who are really listening to the various insights that are brought about by employee resource groups. I would say they are a strong group of advocates and have strong opinions and ideas on how and what needs to be done to support our associates, especially through this time. And our leaders recognize that we need their collective voice to really get through all of this. And so for Fidelity, they are a major component to how we do business every single day.
Thank you, Angela. And you've brought up a number of things as you were talking, which perhaps leads me to a question that I'd really like to target towards Tamara at this point. because, you know, as Angela was talking, she mentioned the table, and we all often hear about, you know, having a seat at the table. And quite honestly, if you can see, I'm sitting at one now just to make sure that I'm always present in that mindset. And with that, you know, as we talked about, we have employees that are split. And even though we may have had field-based employees in some instances, if I recall correctly, I know that Cree, you know, has had, you know, employees certainly who've gone into more virtual ways of working, but employees that are still there every day. So, you know, from your perspective, you know, Tamara, what is the ERG's role in maybe balancing this idea of a table that's disconnected physically for people, such that everyone still feels engaged, valued, and as if they're a part of the same whole? What would you say?
Well, Courtney, I'm going to steal one of your terms, is we've thrown the table out. And we really just, you know, try to create that bridge for our knowledge-based workers, and then also for our operations and manufacturing workers. So just to give you a little bit of information about our organization, about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, we launched our Women's Employees Resource Group, and it sort of started as with our knowledge-based female workers within the organization. And then, you know, we had the epiphany that we were missing a segment of our population, which is our manufacturing, which is a huge part of what we do every day, is the reason that we come to work and we get a paycheck. So we tapped 2 leads to lead that particular group, because that actually works in that population, because they know more than I would what that group needs. So as some of the things that we've done during COVID-19 is to continue that dialogue. So although we've moved to a virtual platform for some of our virtual workers, for our operations and manufacturing employees, we still communicate with them, whether that's through some audio clips that are played in the break room, a Wednesday Wisdom email where we have broken out some additional resources. These are things you can do to have that work-life balance of being a mom, or 5th grade teacher, a wife, as well as you're still going into work. And then we've also highlighted some things in the community to keep them engaged, because community is a really big part of our Women Resource Group. So that has just been some examples, but I really just want to pause and say that we took those examples from our leadership team. Our CEO is one of the most authentic and genuine and sincere people that you want to meet, where he's out at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. when our first shift starts, playing, he's a big rock and roll fan, playing guitar for those people who are actually having to show up to work just to say thank you. And that goes a long way. And it goes back to Angela saying, when DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is a part of your DNA, it's not like you're reacting, it's just, this is what we're gonna do now. So that's just a few examples.
Thank you so much, Tamara. I mean, you know, you've articulated as well, you know, a number of things that we're up against. And it sounds like, you know, again, thematically, what we're hearing is that agility becomes key. And it's also possible when you have the ERGs as a core part of the strategy that we have in place, not only for how we impact internally, but also how we impact in the communities that we live and operate in. And so perhaps that takes me, if you all don't mind, to a question that I'd like to pose to Kerry, because you know, we're hearing examples of you know, how employees are remaining engaged. At the same time, we're dealing with a clear example of the VUCA world. And we've all, you know, heard this, you know, phrasing perhaps, where ultimately the world is volatile, the world is uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. And these are words that may be very similar to some business climates right now, as folks are certainly looking at 2020, but also looking at, you know, what will happen in the years to come. And so, Kerry, you know, thinking about that and knowing that the business climate is changing and perhaps we're still trying to figure it out, what would you say are some additional areas where we should really be looking to our employee resource groups to help lead us?
Yeah, so, you know, within our firm and our environment, like other businesses, you know, our focus is always on trying to create an environment where everybody feels a place, where everybody cares about each other as well as caring about the organization, where everybody is willing to invest in each other and invest in the organization. And so trying to find strategies to develop that sense across all different sorts of people can be challenging. For us at this time, it's been particularly interesting because we all are under one roof in Raleigh, North Carolina, with 250 members of our total organization, and we all come to work every day and physically into the offices. That's been how we operate up until March. And then, although our office has been technically open, it's not been very full, and people have been encouraged to stay at home. So what does it look like? Well, you know, we continue to rely on, first of all, the firm and its management committee to lead through example. We rely on our diversity and inclusion committee members, and we rely on our employee groups. And our employee groups specifically, we expect them to provide leadership, to provide opportunities for members to learn how to lead. I mean, that's very important in our organization, any organization, identifying leaders and giving them opportunities to lead. And our groups provide opportunities for leaders. We also rely on our employee groups to help with the culture. It's their culture. It's not our culture. It's everybody's culture. And so some examples, just this week, actually, you know, last week and early this week, the firm management committee, the diversity inclusion committee, the employee groups, we all wanted very much to make a public and then an internal statement about where we stand on racial injustice, systemic racism. And so we canvassed the firm and invited input from across the firm, but in particular from our Black lawyers to weigh in, to help everybody understand what are the important issues, what are the important messages, what are the important actions that we can take. And so that was a huge example in real time of how our employee groups matter, how they have a voice, and how we rely on them to find their voice and express themselves. A different example would be with our women lawyers. We have a women lawyer group, and when we've revisited firm policies, personnel policies, for example, parental leave or flexible work policies, policies that affect everybody, but in particular affect women and are in particular critically important in a legal law firm environment where billable hours are and time is so important, right? And so we got input and we fashioned policies that end up helping women stay in the law in private practice, which is a huge problem that we have across law firms. So those are examples of things that we've done and ways that we rely on our employee groups. And with COVID, it's going to be the same thing. You know, we're going to need folks to tell us what does reopening look like and how does it work for them given their specific concerns. Families, we have people who have been directly affected by COVID. We have people who have family members who are in high-risk groups, and that changes the perspective. We have people who cannot wait to get away from home and back to the office, and so we have to figure out how to make that work and how to let people stay working remote if that works best for them right now. So we rely on our employees to help us. These are tough issues and tough challenges, but everybody needs to weigh in and feel good about it.
Thank you so much for that, Kerry. It's interesting, and maybe before we switch over to any questions that those participating as a part of this conversation with us have, I would like to pose one more question, really, and Kerry, if you'd like to start off, I really pose this to everyone. Clearly, as we yet again talk about some of the things that are consistent across the responses from the panel. We talk about the importance of employee resource groups. And clearly, there are people who are in the employee resource groups. And oftentimes these are, responsibilities that these individuals take on out of a sense of responsibility, a sense of duty, a sense of purpose. And it becomes something that's in addition to what they're doing, core to their job responsibilities. And so knowing that we've already counted on them so much, and we're going to be counting on them even more to help us navigate these different times. Have you seen any new challenges or maybe disruptions even for those who have been, really ushering through and leading in the employee resource groups? And if so, what do you think we can do to maybe even support those members even more so that they recognize how much they're appreciated for the load, for the great work and the responsibility that they're helping us, usher and carry through the organization?
It's a great question. For us, Courtney, I think it's two things. It's one, recognizing that it is not the employee group's responsibility to do all of this. It can't be put on them and everybody else just say, well, what are you doing about it? You're the employee group. What are you doing? What do you think we should do about it? Everybody has a responsibility to come at it and critically think about it in partnership together. So I think that's important. And secondly, I think thank you goes a long way when people are really putting themselves out there and sharing ideas and helping move progress. Thank you makes a big difference. We've tried to do some fun things generally in the firm to keep morale up. We have photo submissions for what are you doing at home, whether it's children or pets, or this week it's send us a picture of something that brings you joy. Simple things like that. We've had mindfulness seminars. We've had yoga, virtual yoga in the evenings for people who would like to join. And our programs that we've had ongoing, where we have a diversity mentor program, that's continued. That can all continue to be done on the phone and virtually. So we've tried not to lose anything, and we've tried to add some things, but we mainly want to focus on the fact that it is we're all in it together, and it's not one person or group of people's responsibility. It's all of our responsibilities.
And I'll just follow up on what Kerry said. So I'm a leader for our Women's Initiative group, Cree, and one of the things that you mentioned is, as a leader who's leading the ERG, how do you go about not being okay with, or how do you continue to push through the things that are going on? And I'll just speak personally. Last Monday, my heart was so heavy with just all the things that were going on, and I felt the need to, I didn't have to compartmentalize who I am at work versus at home versus in society. So I utilized my voice through our communication and the Women's Initiative to say, I'm a mother of a Black young man. I'm a wife. I'm a sister. I'm a daughter, and I'm not okay. I'm hurting. And just the outpouring of support from, either people who were feeling like I felt, or, the allies that said, thank you for saying this. Let me know what I can do. So that's how we can continue. As a leader, it's a passion, so it doesn't really feel like any extra work. But there are times when you need the ERG just as much as the ERG and the organization need you.
Thank you so much. Angela?
I would really back off. Yeah. Kerry and Tamara, I agree with everything you're saying. I was just thinking about a couple of examples just about disruptions. And I think about COVID in its beginning stages and the impact it had on our Asian employee resource group, and just the overwhelming sense of discrimination that I think a lot of that population of that community had. Really being as supportive as we possibly can to help them get through those challenges, because they are leaders, this ERG, they are leaders in our organization and are always there to support us. So it's being really thoughtful and intentional on how we can finding ways and opportunities to support them as well. That for me was heavy. I also think about just opportunities to make sure that we continue to help support, encourage, and develop our employee resource groups. We have ERG leaders at all levels of the organization, right? We have chairs and co-chairs that can be associates, managers, vice presidents. They're at all levels of the organization. So how do we continue to embrace them and give back? Because at some degree, they're doing dual roles, right? They're trying to focus on their job during the day, as well as what's extremely important to them in the employee resource groups. And oh, by the way, they're not getting paid for this. And so we've recently created development programs for our ERG chairs and co-chairs, just as a way to really come back and encourage their participation, their continued participation and support. Those are just a couple of the things that I think about. And Tamara, completely agree with you. As a Black woman, having a 9-year-old son, having to explain to him sort of everything that's going on around COVID and the fact that we can't go outside, which for him, he's a boy and wants to hang out. So that was a challenge, and he still hangs out with me every day. He's actually downstairs. I forced him to stay on the first floor. And then I think about just having to have conversations with him about being a young man in society and just the challenges around that, being a Black young man in society and sort of what that means and having those conversations. I was able to really bring that not just to Fidelity, but to my employee resource group and share in open forums and have that open dialogue. And it just felt good. And I can't think, I've been at Fidelity for a long time. I can't think of another time where I have felt as comfortable and or as at ease just being myself and bringing myself to work. So really proud of some of the things that Fidelity, but I think broadly, in broader terms, that other organizations are doing to support their employee resource and just their associates.
Yet again, I think this is just a reminder, to us all, as has been iterated a number of times. We do have to do this together. It's not one person's responsibility, one group's responsibility. It's everyone's responsibility. As you have often heard, perhaps, and I don't mean to sound too cliche, but leadership is not a position. We are all leaders. And we all have to live that as a value in what we do. And as we look to our employee resource groups for their leadership, yet again, saying thank you, being appreciative, and also supporting them in the ways that they want and need support is an incumbent upon us for those of us that have them in our organizations or those of us that may have them one day. And with that, while I have not seen all the comments that have come in, I am certain that there are individuals who would love to ask questions right now. I know that we're probably, much closer to where we may need to stop, but hopefully we still have time to take a few. And so perhaps I can turn it over to our additional partner to help us with the question.
Yes, thank you so much, Courtney. I will take a few questions. I think we have a moment for a few questions. So the first one from the audience is, what if your organization does not have any leaders of color in management and does not support its ERGs except for in matters of community engagement?
That's a loaded one. Danelle, do you mind reading it one more time for me?
Sure. What if your organization does not have any leaders of color in management and does not support its ERGs except for in matters of community engagement? It's a top question.
It is. So I guess I'll start. And again, I think that's when you have to, and don't wait for top management to come to you. You go to them, right? So this is when, we talk about throwing the table out the door and really kicking in the door, and go to them and let them know that this is the support you need, asking them how we can get different involvement. And even if that means, I'm fortunate enough to have a CEO that I can go directly to, but even if you don't have that type of organization, make sure you get those senior leadership team. And although you may not have any person of color in leadership, don't make that a building block, right? This is where you really want to hone in on that allyship. And I'll steal another term that I had from Susie earlier, and it goes deeper when you want to have that active allyship. So educating those at the top on what it means to be an active ally, and not just from a perspective of gender or race, but more along the lines of how it can support the employee populations and the employee resource groups outside of just community events.
Maybe to build too on what Tamara is saying, you know, we all do have to remember that this is a journey. We hear that, you know, oftentimes, but it reminds me of a saying as well, and that is, you know, the moment we plant a seed, we also know that we aren't immediately able to eat the fruit. And so you do have to start with, you know, being able to, you know, have the discussion, and then make sure that the discussion moves to action. And then ultimately, again, as part of the journey, you have to ensure that we're making sure folks understand the value proposition, the burning platform for why this is important in the organization. I do think many of us have taken different journeys to get there. And so also an opportunity to leverage collective experience around you that could support you.
And Courtney, this is Angela. I would just add, both you and Tamara have me thinking that the business case for why diversity and inclusion is a thing, and why it's so important, has been out there for eons and eons, right? We're talking decades and decades. And so I would say, if your organization does not have an employee resource group, I think to Courtney or Tamara's point, educating them is of extreme importance. But I would also say, it only takes one person at a time to really make change. And so I am not suggesting by any means, because Fidelity does have several ERGs, that ERGs don't play a huge and critical role into everything we do. But what I'm saying is that if you do not have them, it takes one person at a time. It takes creating allies, finding others who really believe in what you're looking to achieve, to get together to really make change. And that is the beginning. So I'd say, to Courtney's point, this is a journey. It is not going to happen overnight. It's about getting people who perhaps are uncomfortable, or getting them to be comfortable in the uncomfortable. And it takes time. And so it may be for your organization, it starts with you.
Okay. And so I think maybe we have time for one last question, and then we will go to the wrap up, if that's okay.
Thanks, Courtney. I think to be respectful of everyone's time, we're actually going to close it there. We did get a few more questions in the chat, so we will reach out possibly to you all as panelists and see if you can chime in on those so that our attendees can get their questions answered. But thank you so much for participating with us today. And at this point, we're going to just move into some brief closing remarks. So thank you.